Hello and welcome back to another episode of Flawless Plan Garage, where today we are once again continuing on the attempt to cram a 6.6 liter LB7 Duramax and Allison transmission into my 1994 Buick Roadmaster station wagon. And as we have learned several times so far, it really doesn't fit very well. But before I get into today's video, I've got to tell you about today's sponsor. We're brought to you by not knowing when to quit. Not knowing when to quit may have side effects including heartache, diarrhea, nausea, depression, anxiety, loss of sleeplessness, loss of hair, and financial devastation. Contact your local Facebook marketplace and look for abandoned projects to find out if not knowing when to quit is right for you. Not knowing when to quit, it's working for me. Alrighty, we have a test fit again, this time with that Corvette front suspension. And as feared, it appears that the steering rack is going to be an issue. So right now my front pulley is resting directly on the steering rack. Actually, to be more specific, it's resting on a fitting the steering rack. You can't see it. But it's the other one of these power steering fittings that are on the rack. And the front pulley is just sitting on that right now. Then I've actually got quite a bit of clearance to the oil pan. I'm sitting on a piece of, wooden piece of 2x4 there to the stock oil pan. So actually quite a bit of room that way. And the extra width is definitely going to be nice. Got, quite a bit of width right now. I'm definitely sitting off center and crooked in the engine bay right now. But the real question here was, am I going to have enough room with this thing being, back only as far as it can be to the steering rack? And it looks like the answer is no. Looks like the steering rack is going to be a problem. I don't yet know by how much. So I need to double check my measurements here, but this is the body mount right here. And I need to get a measurement to where the firewall is laterally in relation to that body mount, but it's a few inches, 2 or 3 inches, something like that, for me to then have the engine, the heads, and the turbo all sitting in this space. And right now, I'm approximately 2 inches to the back of the head in front of that body mount there, which means that I'm fairly certain the engine is going to have to move forward compared to where it is right now. And that's ignoring the reality of that gigantic transmission and its intrusion onto the passenger compartment. But that is a problem for another day. Get the engine to fit in the engine compartment first, then I'll find some way to make the interior still hopefully be habitable. Okay, new flawless plan on the steering that I want to experiment with. So I think that I still have some ground clearance to play with here. And what I want to try is maybe a lower position for the subframe, but pretty much keeping the engine here, because the engine at this height, I think, will fit. The question is, can we lower the subframe to give a little bit more room for the steering rack and still have ground clearance, or is that really going to also hose up like the position of the suspension? As a reminder, at the current height, the steering rack actually goes, like 2 inches above that mounting bracket, which means even if I could, flatten out and reduce the height of the oil pan up front here, there's still nowhere near enough room to get the steering rack in that space. But if I had another inch and a half to play with, maybe, where the steering rack was lower, I could flatten out, make a custom section of the oil pan up front. Maybe there'd be room for the rack up underneath there. Let's give it a shot. Okay, so it worked, maybe. I wanted to try an inch and a half because I happen to have some, pretty convenient inch and a half spacers available to me, so I didn't have to move any of the tack welds. I just spaced the subframe down temporarily. And it was pretty easy that way to space the engine up an inch and a half. The good news here is that for the first time in forever, I finally have room for a steering rack. I need about 2¼ inches ignoring the fittings on the hydraulic lines, but I need about 2 1/4 inches above the top of those ears, and it looks like I have it, assuming that there's nothing, the crank doesn't drop down into this plane, and that I could make the oil pan flat here in the front, which I think, yeah, we'll see. We'll have to take a look at that. But this would give me the closest I've had so far to having room for the steering rack in roughly the stock location. So that is good. The question is, how much ground clearance do I have left? And the answer is that I have about 7.5 inches here, less about 2 inches that the whole thing is sitting above its likely correct height. So that would mean 5.5 inches or thereabouts. The real question is whether or not, by lowering the front subframe relative to the rest of the chassis, am I going to create a weird situation where, the preferred ride height with the control arms being level here in the front is going to have, that the whole front of the vehicle, is the whole front of the vehicle going to ride higher visually? Is the whole chassis in the front going to essentially ride higher when I've got the ride height set, with the control arms roughly parallel to the ground? Yeah, I checked that again, and not going to work. We're not building a Carolina squat Roadmaster wagon. So no, the subframe needs to go the other way, not further down. It needs to go further up. But before anything can go up, it's got to come out so that we can cut the oil pans to make it go forward. The whole drivetrain has got to slide forward, and to do that in that C5 cradle, I've got to cut the oil pans back to allow some forward movement. Okay, allow me a moment of complaint, if you will. Duramax oil pan. Lower oil pan removed. Perimeter bolts removed. Oil pan should come off, right? No. There's a bolt that goes into the oil pan through this direction, right here, and one right here. What does that mean? Well, it means there's no way to take this oil pan off from the bottom or with the engine attached to the transmission. So if you want to replace the oil pan gasket or something, or seal anything, good luck. Not only do you have to take the transmission off, but of course you also have to take the flex plate off, which means I've got to take it off the stand and pull that off, because you can't reach the stupid bolt heads past the flex plate. Come on, GM. Isuzu, whoever. Come on. And so now it's time to take that flex plate off. So obviously the flex plate bolts are torqued to approximately 7,432 foot-pounds of torque. Would my electric impact take them off? No. How about my trusty air-powered impact? No. Do I have a flywheel or flex plate holding tool? I do not. So it's time to get creative and start cutting up some bar stock. Let's make a tool. Okay, the flex plate is held. How about breaking him loose with an 18-inch breaker bar? No. How about a 72-inch breaker bar? oil pan is off. That was a lot of work. And yeah, it's pretty much the worst case scenario. Remember how I needed to be able to get the front of the motor? Yeah, there's something in the oil pan that's very much in my way. Looks like the oil pump drops down a solid 2 inches below the block, maybe a little more. So the very, very best I could do when it comes to modifying the front of the oil pan would be to just, cut it to here, to where the bottom of the oil pump is. How much would that even represent as far as a cut? Let's see here. Here's the oil pan. It's about 4 inches deep. So I could cut about half of it. And that's about it. Back to the old drawing board. All right, I can already tell this video is getting long, and I know you're anxious to see if this stupid drivetrain is actually going to fit in this stupid wagon, as am I. There's a lot left to cover, but you've been so patient with me up until this point, and I really appreciate both of you for watching this video. So, if you'll bear with me and if you'll give me a little leeway here, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit so you can see how the fitment is coming. Now don't look too close, or you're going to notice some stuff like, engine mounts and the steering rack not really being in the same place. We'll get to that, really. Don't worry, I'll make sure that you feel all of the pain that I have felt on those particular topics. But here's how it's actually starting to fit and come together so far based on these chassis positions. Okay, that, folks, is a Roadmaster wagon body sitting on top of a Duramax engine and Allison transmission. And this, believe it or not, is nicer than the last time I tried this. Looks like I've got some more clearancing to do on the other side there. It's kind of tight and pinching a little bit. I need to cut that out. Gosh, and that's even with moving this whole thing over to the passenger side by an inch. But height-wise, it sure looks better. I have a better chance of getting the drive shaft in. Last time I had tried this, the whole thing was up so much higher that the output shaft of the transmission was completely above this, this ridge. So that part looks a lot better. That's kind of nice. I'm still pretty unconvinced that I actually have the right amount of ground clearance and suspension height with the frame rails in this position, though. I gotta say, like, that looks like significantly more than factory clearance for the frame rail, even at this, you know, what should theoretically be ride height. So I may have artificially put this engine down lower than I can actually get away with, which was kind of my fear with this whole thing. Ultimately, I just don't think I'm really gonna know until I can mock up the front suspension a little bit and see whether we're in the ballpark here or not. So, time to do that. Okay, so these tires have a larger overall, like, rolling diameter than the stock tire size. I don't know why he did that, the previous owner, but one of the things I like about it is it showed me that they fit, and actually this size I can get in a light truck fitment with a much higher load rating, which is good for a heavy wagon that I want to tow with. So being able to get some high load rating tires in this size is something that will be good, which, if I recall, is 235, 60, 17, which I think is the size that I've planned for here as well. Now, the way it's sitting right now, the good part is that, you know, my lower control arms are roughly parallel to the ground, like I had hoped they would be, and that is at you know, about 5 inches of ground clearance, sitting on that cart there, which is about 5 inches tall. And so from that standpoint, this looks pretty close. I obviously don't have the wheel bolted on all the way. The bolt pattern is actually different than the Corvette. This is 5 on 4 3/4 wheel, and it's a 5x120, so it's a Corvette fitment, but it's in the general vicinity, and the lugs are sort of in the hub. So that part, you know, ride height wise looks okay. I'm still just not sure that, like, the ride height of the wagon overall is correct. It definitely sits up, and it did before, sit up higher on these wheels and tires than it would on the stock setup, which I think I'm okay with. It's a trade-off I think I'm willing to make. And the chassis itself is pretty level. I stuck a level on the chassis, and it's pretty much level in this particular spot, as level as the floor is anyway. And I don't think I have a rake on it or anything, so I think from that aspect it's probably okay. I'm still just not 100% convinced that it's going to work, but maybe it's all right. I wish I had a fender handy so that I could try a fender and look at the wheel gap on the fender and see if it looks super awkward, if it looks like I would need to lower it down just for that reason. But the fenders are a long way away. They are tucked up in the ceiling space above me, and that would take many hours to get those things down. I think it seems like worst case scenario, if I did have to lower it a little bit even from here, I think I could get away with it and still have some suspension travel. It would mean compromising ground clearance, of course. Overall, as I've said many times, this whole thing is a game of inches, trying to pick between, you know, the height of the motor, the ground clearance, and a bunch of other compromises, all to get this ridiculously too large engine and turbo package into this vehicle that was never intended for anything remotely this size. I think this might be a compromise I can live with. Thanks for watching.